Bonfard, and I'm joined by my co-host, Alexander Alim, for this edition of Lessons in Orthopedic Leadership. We are so pleased today to be joined by Laura Forese, the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of NewYork-Presbyterian Hospital. Interestingly, it's the only hospital in the country affiliated with two top-ranked medical schools, that is Columbia and Weill Cornell, and recognized especially in New York, but certainly nationally and internationally as a great place to work. And so I'm going to stop there with the introduction because I think we're going to get back into some of Laura's many interesting career path choices. Just say welcome.
Thank you. It's really good to be with both of you.
Laura, welcome. I think one of the other interesting aspects is you are a pediatric orthopedic surgeon by training, and that was the early part of your career, and then made the very interesting transition into hospital administration, which is maybe not a pathway that a lot of surgeons kind of think is a natural leadership pathway to take. So maybe just kind of top view, and then we can break down some of your experiences through that. Why do you think surgeons should look at this as a possible leadership role to take? Because I don't think, at least personally, it's something that I've really kind of considered given the makeup of the physicians and hospital leadership that I've seen throughout my training.
Well, Alex, it's true that it's not as though every hospital leadership role is filled by surgeons, but there are a number of us. And I would suggest that there are a few things that as surgeons really are incredibly helpful as you're going into leadership roles. So the first is surgeons are super comfortable being the leader of a team, right? No surgeon ever thinks that she can go into an operating room and be the only person in there. So it's a team, it's a multidisciplinary team. The surgeon also needs to be very comfortable sort of as the captain of the ship or the person who is the quarterback laying out the plays, but clearly has to be telling everybody else what the plan is. So you're comfortable doing that every time you walk into an operating room as the surgeon. Same is true when you're leading a team. You need to make sure that people understand what the plan is. You need to make sure people understand who's going to make what decisions. All of those things come, I believe, very naturally to surgeons. And then finally, I would point out that surgeons have to be very comfortable making decisions under uncertainty. So if you just stand there, nothing's going to happen. Patient's not going to get any better. In fact, sometimes the patient's going to die. So it's the idea that you can't wait until you have absolutely perfect information to make that next move. That's critical for leaders. And I find that that comes very naturally to surgeons.
That is so interesting and so true. But again, it doesn't always feel natural. So talk us through how you came to the decision to exit orthopedic surgery, because let's be honest, one of the reasons we don't see perhaps as many surgeon and orthopedic surgeon hospital leaders is that it's a long pathway. And it's a long pathway. Many, or if not most of us, are really happy with their job. And so though most of us think, okay, leadership means helping to run a department, running a department, et cetera. So what was your thought process about the transition, and how did you choose to go into hospital leadership? Because your team is huge. You have 10 hospital campuses, 200 primary and specialty care clinics and medical groups, more than 45,000 employees and affiliated physicians, and around $9 billion in revenue. So you have a little bit on your plate for oversight. So unbelievable responsibility. But how did you make the decision to pivot?
Yeah, let me go way back to residency. I had a great chair, and as I was taking my first faculty job out of residency, he actually suggested that I go back and get a management degree when I was first starting as an attending. Great suggestion, although not everybody needs a management degree to do these kinds of leadership roles. But he said to me, I think you like these kinds of opportunities. I had some of that experience as a resident, working in teams, having some leadership roles. And I'll come back to that over time, this idea of leadership roles, formal and informal, because that's really important throughout one's career. So I had my first attending job, and I went to an executive program to get a management degree. And then I started to use it, and I was practicing surgery, but I was volunteering for some opportunities, and I was being volunteered for some things. And it was through those experiences, again, I was a practicing pediatric orthopedic surgeon, and I got other experiences. And then I started to realize that, I can have impact in other ways. Now, you got to be careful about, you're building a practice, you're doing all of those things, but I was able to do some of that juggle. I also let it be known that I wanted other experiences. So my chair was providing some opportunities for me. And then I started to have some success in doing certain team-based roles or other types of things. And I realized that I liked it. So it was those things together. I was in the Department of Orthopedic Surgery at Columbia for 10 years before I left. So I didn't take that lightly, that I was leaving a career, but I also realized for myself that I could, have greater impact. And as I moved to the hospital, I'd already had some informal roles where I could test the water. So that's an important piece, that when people ask me about switching or leaving clinical medicine, you don't do that all at once. That's not typical, and I would certainly not advise that, but you're testing things out. Do you like those kinds of roles? It's not for everybody. Are you good at it, right? You can learn and you can continue to grow, but for some people, it's just not something that they enjoy. They don't have a talent there. So why go in that direction? You've already got a very successful clinical career and clinical pathway. But for others, there comes a point where you see these opportunities and then you can run with it. And that's what happened for me. I had done what I thought I was going to be able to do as a vice chair in that department, and was ambitious about doing other things and making a difference. So I moved into our hospital. I moved from the university department of orthopedic surgery into a hospital role. Now, I started in quite a junior role. I've had 7 or 8 different jobs in the last 20 years. And it's really a business career. Now, of course, my business is medicine, and it's making a hospital and healthcare system run for surgeons like yourself and for others who are going to practice there. But it really is moving and gaining new skills and new different types of roles. So that's how I made that transition.
That's incredibly fascinating. A lot of people in my shoes kind of starting out, I'm 5 years into practice. When they're looking at that management kind of role, a lot of us think about an MBA versus sort of more particular management degree. What advice would you give to surgeons looking at trying to get some sort of advanced degree? As you said, it's not for everybody, but the MBA seems to be a hot ticket right now. What would you suggest in terms of looking at specifics if you are looking for some advanced education?
Very interesting question, and my thoughts have evolved over time. First of all, it is not a prerequisite for a leadership role in a hospital or a healthcare system, or even outside of one of those types of jobs, right? There are a lot of jobs that physicians can move into outside of pure clinical or research roles. So it's not a prerequisite. It does sometimes open a door, but what it won't do is guarantee you something. So a lot of times people come to me and say, I want to change, I want to move into this area, so I'm going to get a degree and then everything will be right there for me. It doesn't work that way. It's far more important what you've done, what skills you've developed, how you've demonstrated those, what experiences you've had are more important than a degree. So got to balance that. The other thing about a degree, now my degree is through our management team within our management program within our School of Public Health. MBA is another one, MPA, MPH. Again, they're all varieties of management programs. I do think it's important to acknowledge that good programs take time. If it's a program that you can just toss off and do in a couple of hours, it's not a good enough program. And it will also cost some money and your time. So putting all those pieces together, you have to weigh all of those. Now, for a lot of people, they like to go to school. I'd love to go to school. And even thinking that it might not have been something that I would necessarily use, I had no sense that it was necessarily going to open any doors for me. I was excited about going to school and getting some more education. Again, that's not for everyone. So you have to put all of those pieces into the mix. Now, over time, for me, that was 20 some years ago. Today, it is far more common to see people come out with MD, MBA degrees, or there are a lot more executive programs. That's a program that I did. It was every other weekend or one long weekend once a month for several years. Those are much more common than they used to be. So looking at all of those, if you like the idea of getting more education, if you can fit it into the rest of your life, because let's face it, people are busy, I'm a fan. But know that it's not a guarantee of anything. The other thing that, again, is important to weigh, it's probably easier to fit the time in to get a MD, MBA, but there's also this notion that I gained a lot from working while I was going back to school. And what I mean by that was I could then use some of the things we were talking about, right? Some of the courses around people skills, had my own team, I had my office, I had the ability to use some of those things in practice. You don't have that when you're going to school full-time or you're in the middle of 2 degrees. So again, all of those things important to weigh. There's no one way to do this. And I advise everybody, think about how it fits into your life and your interests.
Thank you. All right. So I love this, but I want to make sure it's crystal clear, both for me and for our audience. You are a practicing pediatric orthopedic surgeon, and you interacted with hospital leadership. You volunteered and likely were volunteered. And presumably it's one of those things where you did a good job and more opportunities came your way. But at some point, it sounds like you made a decision and you made a clean break from orthopedics. A couple of questions around that. First, couldn't be easy because you had invested, a significant number of years into getting where you were. Not that it was wasted of moving on, but it's just different. And second of all, you had to have really supportive, positive mentors, friends, family, obviously. But talk a little bit about who helped you make this decision, and it clearly has been the right one, I think. Just talk through those issues, please.
Sure. So let me start with this idea of giving up a clinical practice. And it's true, it's a long road, but I ended up not thinking about it that way. I ended up saying, look, everything that I did got me to this place, and I'm ready to leave. It didn't happen overnight, but I was ready to take a next step. And I thought long and hard about what I was doing. And I feel great about having put all that time in, because I think it has made me better at my job. That I could say, look, I understand what that was like to be, it's 2 a.m. and the trays are not exactly what I needed to have and what's going on back there. I felt like those were important years that I put in. I learned a lot, and I felt like I contributed there. For me, what was happening was I thought that I could contribute more, and I keep using this word impact, that I could affect more people in a different type of job, which in orthopedics, I had run my course there. I was going to continue to be, I think, an excellent orthopedic surgeon taking care of kids and families and the like, but I wasn't going to be able to advance, and I wasn't going to be able to move into something. I wasn't going to be a chair. I didn't have a research career. That was, for me, kind of a decision point. But Chuck, you hit on something that was really important. Was I thought a lot about it, and I had an incredibly supportive work environment. I had a lot of people who were sponsors. My chair was just fantastic. His name was Hal Dick, and he's sadly gone, but he was just incredible. My first chair, and then my second chair that I worked for many years was Louis Biliani, who was just outstanding and so supportive. And how can I help you, and how can I find other roles? Now, of course, I'll say that they both benefited from someone in the department who was connecting the dots and could do other things. So it's not like it was completely altruistic, but I have been very fortunate to have had great sponsors, so mentors and sponsors, people who paved the way. And then when I moved to the hospital, I had the same thing. And that was was helpful too. But I also had a very supportive family situation. My husband's a surgeon, and so we met when we were residents, a medical student and resident, and so incredibly supportive, understood, but also said to me, look, at some point, if you really want to pursue this track, you have to start making some decisions. And that's really what happened for me. So I went to a big job in that first job, but I'd already been testing the water in things. One of the things, again, I want to just go back and emphasize this for people, it comes up a lot. Don't leave your clinical practice fully until you know that you're okay with that. Meaning, if your first management job or this leadership role doesn't work out, because this is business, and a lot of times people are reorganized out of jobs. It's not like medicine. A lot of times there are just complete reorganizations in hospitals, healthcare systems. Some system gets taken over, the roles change. You got to know that you may very well be looking for another job, another organization. You got to be comfortable with that. So again, it's all of those kinds of things. I was very fortunate, incredibly supportive husband and family, and then great people at work. So I recognize how lucky I was. That's why it's good to talk to people when you're thinking about these kinds of things. You can bounce things off of people who can give you that. Are you sure? Have you thought about all of these things? That's why it's critical to be doing this and not ever to make that kind of snap decision. Put too much into a career to not really think some of these things through.
I'd love to talk a little bit more about the last point, your sponsorship experience, and something within our own institution that I think even the generation of surgeons a few years younger than me thinks a lot more about than I did when I was coming out into practice. All right, did residency, did medical school, fellowship done. All right, I'm ready. And then you kind of realize about a year or two in, you're like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Obviously, you've been on both sides of that now, and you've had a great support network with your sponsors, and on the other side, being a sponsor for people. What are some tips for people looking for their sponsors? How do you find the right person? Because I think sometimes you kind of think, okay, naturally, I'm just going to go to this person because they're in my division or my department, but they may not have all the answers. They may not be the right person. So what were some of the key successes for you as you found those really helpful sponsors?
Couple things. First, if you're interested in these opportunities, things that are outside the path, let's just say leadership roles in general, you need exposure. And the first thing has to be that you have to let people know that you're interested in those things. So you've got to be out there. This is the classic networking concept. I'm always saying to people, there may not be something today that someone can help you with, but she or he's not even going to know that you're interested if you don't go out there now and let people know. Ask someone if you can grab 15 minutes. 15 or 20 minutes is something that everybody can fit in. And when you tell them that you're asking for 15 or 20 minutes, you're also signaling to that busy person that you're trying to get with that I understand, and I'm going to ask you a few things, and I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. So you're sort of packaging yourself, and it could be, certainly it's people within your department, but it's people who are in adjacent departments that maybe you've seen, but they don't really know you. Maybe it's people in your hospital leadership line. Maybe it's just saying, I'd like to learn a little bit more. Do you have a suggestion of someone else I can talk to? And some of it is, hey, I know about people in other institutions who've done some of this. Do we have any of those kinds of programs? It just kind of builds from there. Look, it could be someone outside of the hospital system. If you're in an academic medical center, it could be the university, but not necessarily the medical school. It could be somewhere else. Again, it's all of those different kinds of things. And if anyone ever offers to connect you to someone, your answer is always yes, because you have 15 minutes that you can squeeze in. And so it's those kinds of things. It's also about word of mouth, right? You're talking to this person who says, oh yeah, you should go talk to so-and-so who runs our peri-op, and she's done this, or he knows this person. What about the business school? What about this other organization? What about the people who are doing our supply chain? I mean, orthopedics, my goodness, talk about in every hospital system, orthopods are the people that we always are thinking about in terms of devices. who's the person in your hospital system who's thinking about device cost, about standardization, about how we're teaching everyone. There are just so many different ways that you can use something that you already have to connect to other people. And then you get to see this person is willing to sponsor me to help me with what I'm interested in, because they're also looking for how it's going to help them or help the organization. It's really this two-way street.
This is so interesting. I want to pivot slightly to the idea of leadership principles that have served you well, because again, you've managed a large clinical enterprise. And I think I've heard you say in the past, and I'm gonna use a term that our nurse clinical manager loved to use, which was you want to make sure you have the right people on the bus and in the right seats on that bus. So if that kind of resonates, can you talk about that and how you conceive of those ideas?
I know that early in my career, I was absolutely sure that the path to success was going to be for me to work harder, and that was going to be the secret. And over time, I realized that yes, hard work is critical and important to do, but that's not the secret to success. The secret to success is having great people on your team and figuring out what their jobs should be. And sometimes it's moving people around to take advantage of that. It's always thinking about the chemistry of the team, because 5 of the best basketball players in the world do not make the best basketball team in the world. So it's making sure that you have complementary skills. It's making sure that when some people are not right for the team, that they exit. It's better for the team, most likely better for them too. So having that courage of making decisions about adding to the team and then subtracting, all of those are so critical. So it's really about getting that team to work. And let me go back again to something I said at the beginning, which is you're the leader of that team. So you got to set up some of those principles. Here's the norms about how we're going to act, and here's what we expect, and here's how we make decisions. All of those things are so critical. So, think about it. You're the person who's setting up everybody in that bus. You got a big responsibility. To me, that's the most important thing in leadership.
Some other leadership ideas you talked about, one of them was, owning up to mistakes. Like you said in your previous comments, you think you find the right person, and then you realize, maybe they're not the right person. You have to tell them bad news, but how hard is that to then get up in front of people and say, yep, that was my fault. And we see this countless time in public life, people really mishandling that, either not owning up to the mistake or almost owning up to it too much and then bringing it up over and over again. So what are some lessons you've learned from just how to come across owning up your mistakes and still have your accountability and maintain your leadership credibility?
So I think for leaders, that's one of the hardest things, because nobody likes to be seen as vulnerable. But over time, what you realize is that's what makes you human, and everyone's going to make mistakes. Not that you're trying never to make a mistake, but when you do make a mistake, it's then course correcting. And if it's something where you need to explain, you explain, here's why we're changing, and then you move on. You don't go back and revisit that over and over again, because then, of course, you've lost everyone's confidence. And if it's something where you need to apologize, it's different than explaining that we did path A, we now realize that doesn't make sense anymore. We are changing. I'll say that was a mistake if we'd only known, but we didn't. Now we're on B. Here's why. Now we're on B and we're moving on. If you've made a mistake, that's something you need to apologize for, it's better to get that out. I'm sorry I did that. I regret I did that. I shouldn't have done that. And now moving on. Can't go back on that over and over again. But I think that there are times in which I have very publicly said, I made a mistake. I regret having done that. I'm not going to do that again. And then it was moving on. So people remember that. They don't even remember what the issue was, but it was like, oh, she said, I'm sorry about that. And then it was, now we're moving on. Because if you just keep going back, you've lost your team. You're focused backwards as opposed to focused forwards. And why is anybody going to follow you?
I really like that. It really resonates. And certainly We hear so much about leaders are human and we're all going to make mistakes, and owning them really does hopefully make people appreciate all that you bring. Maybe a couple more questions. And again, we're so grateful for your time. Agree or disagree with this statement? Great leaders are born, not made.
Disagree. Great leaders are people who continue to work on it. Leadership is a skill like everything else. I don't know what that means. You're born a leader. You're born. I think some people enjoy it more. Some people work harder at it. That's a skill like anything else. And I believe that truly great leaders say, I can always get better.
Similar kind of question, agree or disagree. It's not what you say, but what you do that is key.
Agree 1,000%. It's helpful if what you say also fits, but everybody's watching. Just think, here's my best illustration of that. We had a number of politicians in this last couple of years who were saying one thing and then did something else. What do you think people remember? They remember what they did because that resonated with people. Now, of course, it's best if you can say the right thing and then follow through on that. Actions speak much louder than words.
As we wind down, I would leave it to you to help us bring this to a close, whether you want to share another leadership principle or two that is important for our audience to hear, or perhaps some words of wisdom to younger potential leaders. We've heard a lot about your path, but any final thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners?
I'll frame it that I said before, leadership is a skill. And this idea that you're constantly watching. So you can be watching leaders in your career, in your personal life. I was just talking about politicians. You can be watching a lot of people and saying, what would I do if I were in that situation? So you have lots of opportunities to imagine that and sort of test that out without it being high stakes. What would I do if I were the chair of this department or the CEO of that hospital or the governor of my state? And as you're thinking about that, make sure it's fitting with your own values, right? So because you're going to live with some of those when you do get into these leadership situations and you do make decisions and you have roles, you're going to have to think about, will I feel good about this afterwards? We talked about mistakes. There's no shame in a mistake if you made it for the right reasons. So lots of opportunities to reflect on this before you're actually in one of those roles. And then just finally, one thing that I believe is really important is to get feedback. And that can be very hard to do. It's hard early in career for a different set of reasons. It's hard later in career for other reasons. But getting feedback is what helps you get better. It can be very, very uncomfortable, but that's part of what good leaders do. So don't be afraid of that. You've always, as I said, it's a skill. You can always get better. So I'm delighted with the idea that we're talking about these kinds of things for people's careers, because they don't just happen. Sometimes people look at leaders and just think, oh, everything just happened and now I'd like that. That's not how it is. It's complicated and there's lots to learn, and it's definitely worth it looking for those opportunities, informal, and then at some point, perhaps formal leadership roles.
All right. Well, first of all, congratulations on all that you've accomplished. Secondly, thank you so much for joining us on Lessons on Orthopedic Leadership. And I know Alexander and I both learned a lot and enjoyed the conversation tremendously. So thank you.
Yeah, it's an honor to have you, and so many great pearls about leadership in the last 30 or so minutes that we've learned. I'm going to really think about a lot of these things and think about my trajectory, and we'll see how things go. But really appreciate your time, and really appreciate you joining us on the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm really flattered to have been asked, and wish you both and all of your listeners good success.